Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crown Graves Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're asking the question of what if Putin is overthrown? Now I know that this is the kind of $1,000,000 question that everyone's kind of like racking their heads trying to work out. But I think that for this video we're going to be going through some of Russia's history, right? So in order to understand any country, you have to first of all understand the history, because a country is a product of its history, right? So that's what we're going to do with this. We're going to first of all look at times when, as far as I'm aware, like all the 4 times when a Russian leader has been overthrown. And then we're going to see what the circumstances of that overthrow were and whether that like basically relates to like what's going on at the moment. So we're going to be looking at Russia's past, its present, and its near-term future, right? So join us for this journey. Come along, buckle up, and if you like what you're seeing already, don't forget obviously to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget obviously to share this video as well with many people, because then we can get more people to like join the gang. And so without further ado, enough of my shameless plug, let's just dive into the video now. So in all of Russia's history, as far as I could work out, there have only been 4 times when a leader has been overthrown. One with Peter III in 1762, the second with Nicholas II in 1917, the third with Nikita Khrushchev in 1964, and the fourth with Mikhail Gorbachev in 1991. So with regard to those 4 leaders, we're going to go through each case and we're going to explain some of the wider context around each thing, and then we're going to kind of go on to what the kind of summary of those leaders were. So first of all, with regard to Peter III, that was at a time when Russia was fighting the 7 Years' War, right? So there was 6 years into a 7-year war, and Russia was on what would end up being the losing side of that war, right? So during 1762, there was the so-called miracle of the House of Brandenburg, right? So in the 7 Years' War, you had Britain and then you had Prussia versus nearly all the other countries of Europe, right? And still Britain and Prussia end up winning that war, right? It's a very decisive war. But there was a point at which Frederick the Great of Prussia was pretty much encircled by his enemies, right? And there ended up being a miracle that ended up happening in that year, because the Russian Empress, Empress Elizabeth, she ended up dying, right? And her heir, who was Peter III, was pro-Prussian. So when she died, he ended up ascending to the throne, and then he took Russia out of the war. And this gave enough time and enough kind of like space and stuff, for Frederick the Great to be able to turn around and basically like win that theatre of the conflict. Actually, just as a little bit of trivia, what I should include as well is the fact that Hitler was a massive fan of Frederick the Great. And actually, in 1945, in April 1945, when he was in his bunker, he thought that a similar kind of miracle would happen, because when FDR died in April the 12th of 1945, he had the kind of belief that America would then end up having a pro-German like leader and stuff take over after FDR, and then this person would then take America out of the war, and then this would be the kind of miracle that would allow Germany to come back and be able to then like win World War II, right? So that was the kind of fantasy that Hitler had in those dying days. Just like an interesting kind of thing to point out. But going back to Russia in 1762, you've been fighting people for 6 years out of this 7-year-long war, and for you to now have a new king and he suddenly just kind of like change everything all up here, right? So you were anti-Prussian, now you're pro-Prussian, right? So many people within Russia and also within the Russian court were very angry with this, right? And so his wife Catherine ended up doing a coup, and she ended up like basically taking him out. I think like from memory she just had him like in prison somewhere or whatever. This Catherine, right, she ended up becoming Ekaterina. She ended up becoming Catherine the Great of Russia, right? So one of the greatest like Russian leaders like of all time. This is how she rose to the throne, by deposing her husband, who was weak. He basically helped lose Russia the war, and he was a very unpopular person, right? You're going to see the same pattern again and again in all these cases. The second person, is Nicholas II, right? So throughout the whole of Nicholas II's reign, although there were some good bits, there was lots of things that he did that were like very bad. Even on his coronation, there was a huge like stampede and stuff, killed loads of people, and he just partied the night away. So here's a thing where there was multiple different times when he messed up, right? Most notably as well was the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, where he came in for like that Russia could easily win it, like for very like racist reasons and stuff, because they thought, oh, the Japanese are not serious. Russia ended up being defeated in that war. They sent their navy all the way around the whole world, just to get defeated by the Japanese, right? So there ended up almost being a revolution in 1905, and as a result, the Tsar had to like kind of like give up like some like authority and stuff to the state Duma, so the state parliament, and then he kind of kept doing nonsensical things where he kept like shutting down different parliaments and then putting his own people in, etc., etc. So when it came to World War One, Russia on the Eastern Front in World War One ended up basically losing to the Germans and to the Austrians, right? And by them losing World War One, this eventually led to the February Revolution of 1917, where there was a bread riot, and then it just kind of like spilled out into like a general revolution, and the Tsar was forced to abdicate. And later, obviously, you had the October Revolution, this when the Bolsheviks took over. We've done loads of videos on this, so definitely like check those out. They're really, really good, right? But anyway, so he ended up being overthrown, and again, the reason being, he lost several wars, he's unpopular, and he was a weak leader. He was weak, he was indecisive, and like people kind of respected the office of the Tsar. They didn't respect him personally, right? Or his wife, especially the whole thing with Rasputin. That's a whole different thing. But lots of people in lots of people in Russia were not supportive of him. The third time was with Nikita Khrushchev in 1964. So first of all, when Khrushchev kind of like came to power, this is after the death of Stalin, and he ended up doing de-Stalinization, right? So basically, this is where he kind of opened up and basically kind of said, look, he denounced the crimes of Stalin, right? In a time when before that, obviously, people were terrified to kind of like mention it, right? So for him, he did a lot of reforms, but at the same time, he was quite a erratic person. He was quite a bumbling person, right? And he was kind of seen in many ways as someone who Russians couldn't necessarily respect and stuff. He was seen as a bit of like a joker, right? You can see this now on screen with the famous kitchen debate in 1960. This is with him and at the time Vice President Richard Nixon, who obviously later become president. Nixon is kind of showing off like all like this kind of like American kind of like domestic kind of things in terms of like washing machines and etc., etc. And Khrushchev is just being very rude to him, kind of like just joking and kind of like being not very respectful at all. He kind of looks a bit like a mixture between like Boris Johnson and like Donald Trump. No disrespect to either of them, actually. But anyway, but just that's kind of so that's kind of a big take. So he's not really that competent, right? And in 1963, there ends up being the famous Cuban Missile Crisis, which is something which he basically orchestrated, because he was like, right, we're going to have Soviet missiles, right, in Cuba. So these are the nuclear missiles in Cuba. So Kennedy ended up coming out looking like the winner in this. So even though like the quid pro quo was that American nuclear missiles had to be withdrawn from Turkey at the same time, Kennedy said that Khrushchev had to keep this a secret from the world. And so, although obviously his inner circle, although like Khrushchev's inner circle like already knew about this stuff, it still was a thing where it's like, in the eyes of the world, you've kind of looked like a mug, right? So, as a result of this, in the following year, Khrushchev was out on trips and he was doing this and that. He was away from Moscow from like 5 months of that year, right? And the thing to see, like, well, you can see this with like Thatcher, you can see this with many, many different leaders, right? Don't go on holiday when you're the leader, because especially if it's a rocky time, because this is when plots happen. This is when you try to come back and you ain't able to come back, or you just lose your job, right? So as a result of this, Brezhnev ended up overthrowing Khrushchev, and so you end up having a more kind of like hardline person, a more kind of like sober and like a calm person as such, right? I'm not saying he was sober all the time, but whatever. But the point being that weak leader. It wasn't necessarily a war that they lost, but it was some sort of like military kind of like operation and stuff, right? And someone who's kind of incompetent and not too popular, right? So these are things that you can see with this kind of pattern. And you can see this pattern again with the fourth and final person, who was Mikhail Gorbachev, right? So Gorbachev, he comes in, it's the 1980s, right? And the Soviet Union at this point has been mired in the Soviet-Afghan War. This goes from 79 to 1988. We've covered that in different videos again. So with that, right, he kind of comes in as like a young person, as a kind of like reformer, and what he wants to basically do is eventually end this war, and he wants to do perestroika, which is a restructuring of the Soviet economy, and he wants to do glasnost, which is openness. Yeah, so he allows people to freely criticize the government, and then is then surprised when people like really start to rebel against the system, right? So on top of that, he also got rid of the Brezhnev doctrine. So the Brezhnev doctrine was the idea that if a state within the Warsaw Pact, yeah, right, so basically the Eastern Bloc within Europe, right, if any state there, whether it's East Germany or Poland, etc., if they want to break away, what the Brezhnev doctrine said is basically they're not able to, right? So you can see this in Czechoslovakia in 1968. Soviet tanks roll in and basically stop like any kind of like no. So any kind of anti-communist, anti-Soviet thing just will get crushed. So by getting rid of this Brezhnev doctrine, what ends up happening then is then the Berlin Wall ends up coming down, and then over the next few years, the whole of the Warsaw Pact completely dissolves. Yeah, so by July of 1991, it completely dissolves, as we covered in our previous video, right? So the following month, in August, it ends up being a coup, right? So hardline people, right, hardline communists, they end up taking over. They end up arresting Gorbachev and like kind of like locking him away in his dacha, so like his like country home, and basically they try to like kind of take control of the Soviet Union. What happens though is that Boris Yeltsin, who's the leader of the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, yeah, so each kind of like place within the Soviet Union was its own like republic and had its own leader and stuff. So Boris Yeltsin on a tank flying the Russian flag, not the Soviet flag, he ends up basically like saying, no, we're going to put an end to this coup and stuff, and we're going to like basically like take control. So the coup ends up being crushed, but then what ends up happening then is that Yeltsin embarrasses Gorbachev, right? And basically ends up kind of undermining him, and eventually him and a few other like kind of like leaders, so you have like the leader of Belarus and you have the leader of Ukraine, they come together in a meeting and they decide that the USSR is going to be completely dissolved, right? So this is how Gorbachev was got rid of, by bringing an end to the Soviet Union. Yeah, you can't be the leader of the Soviet Union anymore if we pull the rug from under you and there's no more Soviet Union. So these are the 4 times when a Russian leader of some sort has been overthrown, right? In all cases, you can see that there's a weak leader, there's an unpopular leader, and it's a thing where in all these cases there's been a time when they've lost a war or they've lost some sort of military kind of thing. So there's lots of embarrassment. In the final case where we talk about with Gorbachev, don't forget obviously 34,000 Soviet troops died in the Soviet-Afghan War. And so even though it's like, yay, we ended this war, you ended it and it's a defeat, right? So it doesn't, the Russians like don't like defeats, right? It really kind of like bugs them. So now that we've dealt with Russia's past, right, now we have to look at the present. So with the present now, we're going to be looking at a series of different like opinion polls and stuff, yeah, and we're also going to just be talking about Putin in general. So the thing to note with Putin is that he's very, very popular, he's a strong man, and he's kind of the embodiment of Russian strength and Russian like national pride. So with Yeltsin, he was just an old incompetent like plutocrat. He was just a drunk and stuff, right? He just made a fool of himself. And this was at a time when the whole Russian economy was just collapsing. Mass suicides, mass alcoholism, mass everything, right? Just everything, just terrible. Putin comes to office in 1999 / 2000, and he ends up through a series of different reforms. He ended up completely transforming Russia. He liberalized the economy, he made it more dynamic, raised people's standard of living, and it also restored Russian pride, modernized the military, all these kind of things, right? So from a Russian perspective, he is a great leader, right? He's not done anything like bad from a Russian perspective at this point, and it's a thing where the Russian people respect strong leaders, right? And on top of that as well, he has this kind of like bunker mentality, yeah. So like this is why he's like sits so far away from everyone else, kind of at a table and stuff. He doesn't want to get COVID, but also the Tsar back in the day would also like be sitting like far away from people, to kind of like show his authority, right? So he's kind of modeling himself much in the same way as the Tsars of old, right? So it's not like He's not trying to govern Russia as a Soviet leader was. He's trying to rule it pretty much as like the Tsars did, right? And for him, he's also surrounded by the so-called Silovik. So the Silovik, this in Russian basically means the men of force. So these are basically the strong men. These are the people of influence. These are the powerful people who surround Putin. So, these people are loyal to him. So in the days of the Tsar, people were loyal to the office of the Tsar. Regardless of who the Tsar is, everyone's loyal to them, right? In the days of the Soviet Union, people are loyal to the ideology of Marxist Leninism, and so whoever is the leader there, that's who they're loyal to, right? In this case here, people are loyal to Putin personally, right? Russia doesn't have an ideology, it doesn't have this kind of Marxism anymore, etc., etc. Now people are loyal to Putinism, yeah, they're loyal to Vladimir Putin, right? So this means that it's very unlikely that any of these people here are going to overthrow Putin. Yeah, there's not going to be a palace coup, as it were, because these people are only there because of Putin, and they are there because they support Putin. And if they didn't support Putin, Putin wouldn't have these people around, right? He wants these people to be lackeys. He wants these people to be yes men. So it's very unlikely that any character within this inner circle are going to do anything, right? And now we're going to be looking at some of the opinion polls, right? So Gary Langer, so he is an American pollster, and he's done opinion polls in Russia recently, and well, for many years as well, I imagine. But recently he did a telephone survey, poll, where he asked 1,640 people their opinions on the recent war. Although in Russia they call it the special military operation, they don't call it a war, right? So what he found was that 58% of people support this war, right? Just 23% are opposed to it, and 6% are on the fence. So that's something to kind of bear in mind, Joe. Whether it's propaganda or whatever it is, etc., etc. The fact is that the Russian people support this war. However, when you break it down through demographics, what you can see is that actually amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, just 29% of them support the war, and 39% of them are opposed to it. Now, obviously, first of all, this leaves a big chunk of people who are kind of don't know, or don't have much of an opinion, etc., etc. So that's something to kind of bear in mind. But it's also a thing where, in terms of the demographics of Russia, young people don't count, right? So their demographics is really, really messed up. As you can see on screen here, it's a thing where, as a result of World War II, right, in particular, it's a thing where, each 30 years or so, right, each kind of generation ends up being a massive, massive dip. And the reason for this is because World War II in Russia killed so many people that even, not only obviously was that generation that was involved with it, not only were they heavily hit, but also subsequent generations of pretty much, the children of the unborn, the grandchildren of the unborn, right? The fact that these people never grew up to be able to have children of their own, and then in turn for them to have grandchildren, this means that it's an ongoing thing, which each 20 or 30 years, you can still see the impact of World War II and the huge cost and the huge sacrifice of the Russian and Soviet people, against the fight against Nazi Germany, right? So in these terms here, the little demographic here between 18 and 24 doesn't actually matter, because most Russian people are much older than that, and also it's a thing where these people are obviously much more in favour of the war than these young people, right? Now that's one poll company, right? There's another poll company which is VCIOM, and this is actually a government owned poll thing, right? So take it with a pinch of salt. So for them, they're saying that 71% of people are supporting the recent war. So the figure is probably somewhere between Langer's 58% and this government poll, which is saying 71%, right? But either way, the point is a lot of people support this current war. But also as well with this government poll company, right? You can see they talk about a bunch of different things here. So the approval rating for not only just the different institutions within Russia, but also the political leaders themselves. So first of all, talking about the institutions within Russia. So the office of the presidency, so not the president himself, it doesn't matter who the president is, in terms of the office of the presidency in Russia, has a 70% approval rating, right? The office of the prime minister has a 44% approval rating. the office of the government of the Russian Federation, right? So this is because obviously Russia is a federal kind of like union and stuff, right? So the government of the Russian Federation is supported by 43% of the population, and the State Duma, which is like the parliament, right, has an approval rating of just 45%. So you can already see that the office of the presidency, whoever that president is very much more respected in Russia than the office for all like these other things, right? You can see a similar thing in America, like kind of where whoever the president is tends to have a higher approval rating than Congress, for instance. Congress and everything else is just way down and stuff, right? But now we're going to look at the political leaders within Russia and what their approval ratings are, right? So remember we said that the president of Russia, the presidency of Russia has a 70% approval rating, right? Vladimir Putin, according to this government poll, has a 77% approval rating. His number two, who is basically the prime minister. So in Russia, they have a semi-presidential system, they call it. So you have a prime minister and a president. So the president is higher than the prime minister and blah, blah, blah. So the prime minister of Russia at the moment, Mishustin, I think that's how you pronounce his name, he has an approval rating of 56%, right? Now, remember we said that the office of the prime minister has a 44% approval rating. Yeah, he, from being Putin's number two, he is up at 56%, right? So these people are within the party called United Russia, right? United Russia, they are like the dominant party. However, you have people in the so-called loyal opposition. So these are the different parties which are allowed to operate within the system. And although there might be some like disagreements with like Putin's policies and stuff, by and large, they criticize him within a very narrow parameter, right? And you could see the same thing happening within the Soviet Union days, right? So in the Soviet Union, you could still criticize things here. Like you could criticize the war in Afghanistan. You could criticize all these different things here, but you could debate things only within a tiny little margin. Like they call it the so-called Overthrown window. The Overthrown window in Russia is relatively small, right? So these different parties, yes, they might come out and say that they're opposed to Putin, but they don't actively kind of criticize him, right? So for all intents and purposes, they're the loyal opposition, right? So number three in terms of the most popular Russian leader at the moment is Zhirinovsky, right? So Zhirinovsky, he is the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia. Now that name is a complete misnomer, right? The reason being is because if you look at this party's policies, it's neither liberal nor democratic, right? It's incredibly ultra-nationalist, right? So you have, United Russia, which, whether you like Putin or not, etc., the Liberal Democratic Party, right? This Zhirinovsky guy is way more to the so-called right than Putin ever is, right? So, ultra nationalist, very far right. So if you think that you can get rid of Putin and someone more liberal is going to take his place, forget about it, right? That's just not going to happen, right? So so you got him. Then the fourth most popular leader in Russia at the moment is Mironov, right? So Mironov, he's again part of this loyal opposition. So he represents Just Russia, right? So Just Russia, this party here, they are basically the kind of center-left kind of party. They're kind of the equivalent of maybe kind of the Labour Party in a way, so they kind of, again, are part of this loyal opposition where they don't really criticize Putin. They just, so they kind of just go along with what he's kind of saying. So this person here has an approval rating of just 25%, right? Zhirinovsky was 26, Putin is 77, right? So just bear that in mind, right? So the next two kind of closest parties, forget about it, right? There's, he's not going to get overthrown there. And the fifth most popular Russian leader that was on this poll was Medvedev, right? So Medvedev had been the prime minister under Putin a few years ago. His approval rating at the moment is at just 25%. And the reason for that is because in the last few years, he got caught up in a corruption scandal or something like that. So people don't really like him and stuff, etc., etc. But that's the only reason why he is so low down there, right? So in terms of who are the people who are going to overthrow Putin, right? Navalny, he's very unlikely to be able to come to break out of prison, whatever kind of it. It's not some of these things are not impossible, and actually quite a lot of people who like were standing in like the most recent Russian presidential things who I would have preferred to become the leader, but realistically that's just not going to happen, right? So realistically, Putin just isn't going to be overthrown. He's far too popular. He's been far too popular, and even if this war was to drag on into like a 9-year long war, similar to like how it was in Afghanistan and stuff, right? I still don't see him being overthrown. Things would have to get really, 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 really bad. Yeah, you'd have to make a lot of mistakes for the Russian people to change their mind. And also the thing to bear in mind as well is that they blame not Putin for this recent war, they blame aggressive NATO, right? So as we covered in our previous video, right, about like kind of what if Russia joined NATO, you know, Russia views NATO as an aggressive thing, right? The Russian people see NATO expanding further and further towards them. They see NATO as a threat to them personally, right? So not about just what Putin, yeah, right? They see Putin as defending them personally against an encroaching and aggressive NATO. So, you know, even if it ends up being a complete failure, the thing is that Putin can just always spin it as, oh, we would have won had it not been for the West supplying them with anti-tank guns, or them like not like, you know, except whatever it is, right? They can spin it any which way, and even if they don't spin it right, it's a thing where the Russian people are still going to be like, okay, cool, but like at the end of the day, NATO's our enemy and Putin is standing up against them, right? So all of that covers, you know, so we've covered the past, we've covered Russia's present. Now we're going to be thinking about Russia's future. The thing we have to realize at the moment with these current sanctions and these current like companies pulling out and blah blah blah, right, all etc., right? We have to remember that most Russians survived the 1980s and the 1990s, right? So think about this. First McDonald's opens up, first Starbucks opens up, the first Pizza Hut opens up, etc., right? Within living memory for most Russian people. So if these companies now decide to pull out, if Russia gets kicked out of the international banking system, if basically the whole kind of like Western capitalist world kind of pulls out of Russia and puts sanctions, etc., etc., the Russians don't care, because within living memory, they weren't even a part of this damn system in the first place, right? And if they have to go back to how they lived in the 1990s, where everything was falling to pieces, they've been through that within their living memory. Most people, you know, even people like my age in Russia, they would have like grown up in the midst of all that chaos, right? So even people who are quite young like me would have known what it's been like living through that time. And they would have throughout their life known what it's like under Putin, where things got much, much better for the average Russian. And now it's being brought back down. Why? From the Russian perspective, it's from as a result of like what the West is doing, right? So they can put up with a lot of hardship, right? That the Russian doesn't think like someone in England or someone in America, right? Where we think like materialistically, yeah. Like when we invaded Iraq in 2003, right? If the whole international world had put sanctions on us, had pulled out companies and stuff, etc., right? We would be like, oh my god, okay, okay, we need to pull out out of Iraq like tomorrow, right? So that's how we think. But the Russians don't think like that, right? The Russians are tough and they can put up with hardship. They're incredibly patriotic. If they're angered, they're very vengeful, and they also can be very xenophobic, right? So if you kind of chase the bear into its cave, as I said to people, right? Don't be surprised when the bear starts to bite back, right? Like that's basically what we're doing at the moment with Russia. So the problem with many people in the West is that they don't understand the history of Russia. They don't understand the Russian people. And so they look at things through a Western perspective. And what they don't realize is that the Russian people do not think in the same way at all, right? And if they have to put up with lots of hardship and stuff, they will grin and bear it, right? And the thing to really note as well is that the Russian people like strongmen like Putin. So when there was a poll last year in June, right, there was the question of who is the greatest Russian of all time. And this poll question gets asked in Russia quite a lot. Now, 39% of people to this day still say that Joseph Stalin, who wasn't even Russian, yeah, he was from Georgia, right? They still say that he is the greatest Russian of all time. Not the greatest Russian leader, the greatest Russian. So all these other people, Tchaikovsky, Pushkin, all these other people, etc., etc. No, he is the greatest Russian of all time. So this is someone who, is responsible for the deaths of at least almost 10 to 20 million of his own citizens. This is someone who's a ruthless dictator. This is someone who terrorized people, etc., etc. And still, Russians support him. Even in the darkest days of World War II, when the Germans were at the very gates of Moscow, they could have just overthrown Stalin, right? They could have just been like, right, now the time to get rid of this dude, right? But they stuck by him. They were rallied by him, right, to push against their attacking enemy, right? So much in the same way, you see Putin. Putin's also on that list of greatest Russians of all time. He comes at 23% or something like that. So 23% Russians think that Putin is the greatest Russian who has ever lived. So when you understand that, you go, okay, the Russians like a strongman. They are not intimidated by suffering. They are not intimidated by all these things, right? Whoever is strong, they support. If Putin pulls out of Russia, that's when there might be a revolution. That's when there might be a palace coup. And that's why Putin is not going to pull out of Ukraine, right? Did I say Russia? Anyway, he's not going to pull out of Ukraine, right? Because if he does that, he understands Russia. He understands Russian history. He understands that that will be the moment when he might get overthrown. And let me just say this as well. If he is overthrown, what will then happen from the Russian perspective is that they will go into the chaos of the 1990s again, right? Because they remember what ended up happening when everything all collapsed in itself, right? They remembered when Russia was humiliated. So for them, they do not want a repeat of that. They see liberal democracy, which they never really had in the 1990s, but they kind of see that as, oh my God, that's bad and stuff, right? So more likely than not, what you're going to happen is, as a result of this war, you're going to have a more ultra-nationalist Russia. You're going to have a less liberal, a less Western, a less free, a less democratic Russia, right? And what you're essentially doing is creating North Korea on steroids. So Russia still has the largest nuclear arsenal in the whole world. It has 18% of the world's global wheat supply, right? So in terms of countries like Egypt, which have huge populations that are already struggling to feed themselves, right? A lot of Russian wheat ends up supplying these countries, right? And all around the rest of the world. So as a result, wheat prices are going up. So now you're going to start to see lots of people struggling to eat. And when people struggle to eat, that's when you're having riots, right? You're also going to see oil prices go up. 10% of the world's oil supply comes from Russia. And in terms of natural gas, Russia has 54% of the world's proven natural gas reserves. And in terms of the supply of oil to Europe, 30% of Europe's oil comes from Russia. 39% of its gas comes from Russia. And obviously, the further east you go, the more dependent these states are. So we put all these sanctions on Russia. If Russia decides to shut these things off and go into this full bunker mentality, as they did back in the days of the Soviet Union, guess what? We're all stuffed, right? So having any understanding of what Russian history is, and what Russia and their way of thinking is, these recent sanctions are the exact opposite response that one ought to be doing. If one wants to stop Russia from doing such things, right? If you want Russia to open up, you have to look at Russia's history at times when they have opened up, and that's been the times when the West has welcomed them with open arms. It's not been the times when they've tried to attack them and stuff, right? So Russia is being pushed more and more towards China. You can really see now that China is buying up Russian assets and stuff. You really see that China's getting more and more involved. Russia's getting closer and closer with China. So all this is the exact opposite approach. And it's very short-sighted thinking, and it's very this modern era that we have, this kind of Snapchat kind of way of thinking, where we can't think about things long term and stuff. We're just very reactive and go, that's bad, we're going to do this. But in reality, we have to think of the bigger picture. Even my friends and family members have said at different points, oh, let's just assassinate Putin. Do you have any understanding of what that would do to Russia? Do you have any understanding of how the Russians would react to that? Even if someone within Russia did that, it would not end the way that you think it would end, because you simply do not understand Russian history or its culture or its politics. And so, with that being said, I hope that you like this video and stuff. And obviously don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe and stuff. Leave a message in the comment section about, like, you know, what your thoughts are on all of this. And the next video, I will try and do one on the Stuarts. I know I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I'll see how the kind of situation in Russia and Ukraine and stuff kind of plays out, because I hadn't planned to do this many videos on it, but I think it's so like prescient that more likely than not I might have to do another video on that. But in the meantime, hope you have a great day, and bye.